The Sith believed they had found the perfect path to power. They thought they had uncovered a secret that would make them stronger than the Jedi, a philosophy that would ensure their survival while their enemies crumbled. But the truth is far more disappointing. The rule of two was not a strategy built on wisdom or strength. It was a philosophy built on fear, on paranoia, on a refusal to evolve. And because of that, it doomed the Sith from the very beginning. Imagine a world where the Sith had no limits, where they trained armies of dark side warriors, where knowledge was passed down freely, where every apprentice could rise without being forced to kill their master. The Sith could have been a tidal wave, an unstoppable force that reshaped the galaxy in their image. But instead, they chose to stay small. They chose to hide. They chose to follow a rule that ensured their own destruction, time and time again. It is easy to assume that the rule of two was necessary, that it kept the Sith from falling into chaos. But if that were true, why did it always end in failure? Why did every Sith empire collapse the moment one person made a mistake? Why did they spend more time destroying each other than actually ruling the galaxy? If the rule of two was meant to create strength, then why did it only leave them vulnerable? There is nothing intelligent about limiting your own numbers while your enemies continue to grow. There is nothing strategic about a system that guarantees your extinction if one battle goes wrong. The Sith were supposed to be the ultimate force of domination, yet they followed a rule that made them weaker than they ever should have been. It was a philosophy that did not lead to victory. It led to stagnation, to betrayal, to ruin. And the worst part is, they never even realized it. In this video, we're going to break down why the rule of two was not just flawed, but completely ridiculous. We will look at how it held the Sith back, how it guaranteed their destruction, and why abandoning it would have made them unstoppable. The Sith were meant to rule, but they were too afraid to embrace their own power. And that is why in the end, the rule of two was the dumbest mistake they ever made. The Sith believed that limiting their numbers to two would make them stronger, but all it did was feed into their own paranoia. The master constantly feared their apprentice would kill them, and the apprentice spent every moment plotting their betrayal. This was not a philosophy built on strength, it was a system built on fear. If the Sith truly believed in power, they would have wanted as many strong individuals as possible. A single master hoarding all the knowledge only weakened the Sith as a whole. If one Sith fell, their secrets went with them. There was no backup, no contingency plan. They were gambling their survival on the idea that the next generation would be just as strong, if not stronger. But history proved this to be a failure. Time and time again, the Sith would rise, destroy themselves, and then have to start all over again. They never learned from their past mistakes, because the rule of two ensured that only two people at a time ever knew the full scope of Sith teachings. The Jedi had thousands of years of history to build on, while the Sith had to restart every time a master and apprentice wiped each other out. And what did this ultimately lead to? The Sith being stuck in a never-ending cycle of self-destruction. They prided themselves on their strength, but they made themselves weak by design. If a single Jedi managed to kill one Sith, then half of their order was gone in an instant. How was that power? That was not power. The rule of two was not about making the Sith stronger. It was about ensuring they remained fragile. Darth Bane thought he was securing their future, but he was really dooming them to an existence of constant betrayal. Every Sith apprentice was raised to believe that the only way forward was to kill their own master. That was not loyalty. That was not wisdom. Instead of working together, the Sith spent their time waiting for the perfect moment to stab each other in the back. That meant that every master had to hold their apprentice back, just enough to stay ahead. And every apprentice had to pretend they were not plotting their master's death. Imagine how much knowledge was lost because of this endless cycle. Imagine how many potential Sith Lords were never able to reach their full potential, because they were cut down too soon. The Jedi did not have this problem. They trained generation after generation, ensuring that their order continued to grow stronger over time. One master, one apprentice, then back to the beginning. It was a philosophy that refused to evolve, and it showed. By the time the Sith finally took over, they were already standing on unstable ground. And what happened the moment Palpatine was betrayed? The Sith were gone. They had no students, no successors, no infrastructure to rebuild. The rule of two ensured that their entire empire could crumble overnight. It was a philosophy designed to fail, and yet they followed it blindly, convinced that it was the path to power. If the Sith had ignored the rule of two, they would have been unstoppable. Imagine a galaxy where the Sith were allowed to grow their numbers without restriction, where knowledge was passed down from master to student without fear, where Sith Lords ruled entire planets, commanding armies of Force users without hesitation. The galaxy would not have stood a chance. Instead, the Sith chose to operate in the shadows, limiting themselves to secrecy and deception. That was not strength, that was cowardice. They had the power to reshape the universe in their image, yet they spent generations hiding from the Jedi, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when they did finally make their move, they still collapsed from within. Palpatine had everything he needed to create a true Sith empire. Yet he still clung to the rule of two. He refused to train more apprentices. He refused to share his knowledge. He let his own fear dictate his actions, and in the end, it cost him everything. If the Sith had embraced their numbers, they would have ruled forever. Instead, they set themselves up for extinction. Power was never meant to be limited. The dark side thrived on ambition, yet the rule of two stifled it. It turned a powerful order into a self-destructive cult. It ensured that the Sith could never truly rise, only fall, over and over again. That was not strength, it was weakness. If the Sith had abandoned this ridiculous rule, they would have won. The Jedi were only able to survive because the Sith constantly sabotaged themselves. Imagine a galaxy where the Sith had the same numbers as the Jedi, where every Sith Lord was given the same freedom to learn and grow. The Jedi would have been overrun in a matter of years. But no, the Sith followed a rule that kept them small and easily wiped out. The Jedi only needed to find and kill 2 people at a time to destroy the Sith completely. That was not strategy. That was incompetence. The Sith were so obsessed with their own survival that they created the very thing that ensured their downfall. Even the few times the Sith did succeed, it was short-lived. Palpatine took over the Republic, but he was still bound by his own paranoia. He refused to train a new generation of Sith. He refused to let his empire grow beyond himself. He was so afraid of betrayal that he kept his own order small and weak, and because of that, he was overthrown with a single act of defiance. The Jedi did not win because they were stronger. They won because the Sith refused to change. The rule of two did not make the Sith powerful. It made them predictable. It turned them into nothing more than a temporary threat, one that could be defeated as soon as their numbers ran out. The Sith were warriors, conquerors, rulers. They should have never been reduced to a secret society of 2 people at a time. Darth Bane thought he was saving the Sith, but he was really cursing them. He took an order that once commanded entire empires and reduced it to a master and apprentice. Whispering in the shadows, afraid of being found, that was not the way of the Sith. They were meant to dominate, to control, to reshape the galaxy as they saw fit. Instead, they played a game that ensured they would always lose in the end. The rule of two was not a doctrine of power, it was a doctrine of fear. It was a system designed to keep the Sith weak, and the worst part, they never even questioned it. They followed it blindly, convinced that it was the only way. Even as they were wiped out time and time again, they never thought to change their approach. They accepted their fate, even as they walked straight into their own destruction. The Sith should have ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, yet they let themselves be destroyed by their own arrogance. They were not outmatched by the Jedi, they were outmatched by their own stupidity. They had the power, but they refused to use it correctly. And that was why they failed. At the end of the day, the rule of two was the worst decision the Sith ever made. It turned them into a dying breed, a group that could never truly win. Every time they got close, they found a way to sabotage themselves. It was not the Jedi that kept them from ruling the galaxy, it was their own broken philosophy. If the Sith had abandoned this rule, they would have been unstoppable. They had the potential, the knowledge, the power, but they chose to limit themselves. They chose to operate in fear, and in doing so, they ensured that they would never truly win. The Sith could have built an empire that lasted forever, but instead, they followed a rule that made them fragile. They believed in strength, yet they adopted a system that guaranteed weakness. They were their own worst enemy, and that is why the rule of two was not just flawed, it was dumb.